Hey everybody, welcome back to the NLP for Tensorflow tutorial series. I'm Nate. I know it's been quite a while since we've had an upload. That's my fault. I've been really busy and I really appreciate everybody being patient and everybody who reached out offering support. I really appreciate it. Last time what we did is we set up an LSTM and we started kind of making an evaluation a framework for our model, but we didn't really finish that. So what we're going to try to do today is one, we're going to set up restoring the model weights that we've saved to a log directory. Two, we're going to be able to have the ability to predict on the test set. And then three, we want to be able to set up the ability to test your sentiment on sentences that you can write yourself. So let's jump right into it. Okay, so here we are back in our main file. And the first thing that we're going to do is actually change a couple of these hyperparameters that we set before. The first one being this vocab size. We're going to change this to 35,000. And that'll just give us a more robust vocabulary to train our model on. The next thing we're going to do is we're also going to change the sequence length to 72 because models have an easier time predicting smaller sequences, and then also it's going to reduce the amount of time it takes to train, so it's kind of a win-win. The first thing I said we wanted to do was restore our model weights. So if you remember last time, we set up a saver, and that saves our checkpoint to a log directory. So here we have our log directory, and this is where your checkpoint should be saved. So we're going to copy that, and the way that you actually restore the model is through this TF session and also through the TF saver. So we don't want to do it with this with statement because this is our training loop. So we're going to kind of do this outside of the training. We're going to set our training loop to be a function. That way you can call to that function if you'd like to train your model, or you can just restore the weights and then go ahead and do some predictions or evaluations of the model. So the first thing that we're going to do is delete this line, and we're going to tab this stuff over. And then we're going to wrap our the rest of our training stuff in a function. So we're going to say def train model, and we're going to have to pass that the xtrain and ytrain variables. So next thing we're going to do is we're going to set up the restoring of the model. So I'm going to scroll to the top here, and I'm going to set up a variable for restoring the model. So if true, restore the model weights from file. So we're going to call this restore equals true. Because I already trained the model, and then we're going to come back down here, and we're going to use this saver object that we have initialized to go ahead and reload our weights. But first, because we did use this sesh here when it was wrapped in the with statement, we're going to have to instantiate our session up here. So sesh equals tf.session, and then down below here, we're going to say if restore. So if restore is true, we're going to go ahead and say saver.restore. And you pass that the session, and then you pass it that directory that I copied earlier that has your checkpoint, and that'll go ahead and restore your model weights. So your model's already reloaded, and now we can set up a bunch of functions to go ahead and evaluate our model. Okay, so now that we have our model weights restored, we're going to set up the prediction of our test set. So we're going to have two functions here, and I'm going to explain in a second, but we're going to have one called translate seek to text, and that's going to take seeks, and I'm just going to pass for now. And the other one's going to be predict test, and that's going to have one parameter. It's going to be n equals 10 pass. So what we're going to do here is this predict test function is going to take a sample, n samples of our test set, and it's going to run a prediction, and it's going to print out the text as well as the prediction it made, as well as the actual label for that piece of data. So in order to get the text from our test set, we're going to have to translate it from the integer sequence that it already has back to text. And when we did our tokenization, some words got cut off, like stop words, and also if a word was rarer than the 35,000 that we set, it got cut off too. So we're going to want to be able to see the text that it's actually been given. So in order to do that, we're going to have to translate the sequence back to text. So we'll write that one first. So we're going to say words equals empty list, and we're going to loop over these sequences. So for seek in seeks. And the first thing we're going to need to do is trim off the zeros from the sequences, because remember they're padded if they're shorter than 72. So we're going to say trim zeros, numpy.trim zeros, which is a very helpful function to trim off the zeros inside of a sequence. And that's all we're going to do there. And then we're going to do a little bit of a tricky line of code here, but just bear with me. I'm going to write it first, and then I'll explain it. So join, and then we're going to say idx to word for an idx in seek. So what this is going to do is we're looping through all of our sequences, and we're going to say for every index inside a given sequence, we're going to look up the word given the IDX that we're at, and that's going to do that across the whole sequence, and then we're going to join all those words together into a piece of text. So this words list here is going to hold all the untokenized text from our data set. And then we're just going to return that. So return words. Okay, so next we're going to write this predict test function. So what we're going to try to do here is we're going to take n samples of our test set and print out the text, which we're going to get from here, as well as the prediction it made, as well as the actual label from the test y dataset or variable. So to do that, we're going to have to make a random choice. So we're going to say rand idx equals, and I'm going to write this one again, and I'm going to explain this one too. But this is how it's going to be: len of test x n, and then replace equals false. So what we're going to do here is we're going to make a NumPy random choice of n samples over the length of our test x data set. And basically what this is going to do is it's going to print out a bunch of indexes that we can access. So it's going to print out a list that's n length, and those are just going to be a bunch of indexes from 0 to the length of the test x dataset. And then what we're going to be able to do is access those n indexes and basically extract out those random choices of data that we're going to want to use to make our prediction. So we're going to say test x sample equals test x at that random idx. And we're going to do the same thing for our test y, rand idx. Beautiful. All right, so I'll add a little comment here. So saying make random choice of n samples from test set. Beautiful. Now, we're going to be able to run our model. So when you do predictions in TensorFlow, what you're going to want to do is not pass the optimizer to your fetches list. So we did that in our training loop here. So in our train model, we have the optimizer within our fetches, and you don't want to do that when you do predictions, because this optimizer, when you call to it, will actually optimize your model, so you're not going to want to do that on your test set. So we'll exclude that from there, but we'll also include the variables that we created last time for the choices and whatnot. So we're going to say L, comma P, comma C underscore P, comma C equals sesh.run, and we're going to pass it the loss, the prediction, the correct prediction, and the choice as our fetches, and then our feed dict is going to be our x is going to be our test x sample, and our y is going to be our test y sample, and that will go ahead and run our model, get the predictions over these samples right here. So run the model to get predictions. All right, so next what we're going to want to do is we're going to print out our text from this test x sample, as well as our prediction and our actual label. In order to get the text, we're going to have to call this function that we created earlier. So we're going to say text equals translate seek to text, and we're going to pass that the test x sample. And for the labels, the actual true labels, we're going to do a NumPy argmax over it, because if you remember correctly, our labels were one hot, so it'll turn something like 0, 1 to 1, or 1, comma 0. If that was the label, it'll turn that to 0. And so that's what we're going to do right now by calling this NumPy argmax function. So NumPy.argmax over our test y sample, and we're going to do that axis equals 1. All right, so that'll turn these into single integers, so we'll be able to see a little bit easier what was going on there. So I'm also going to add a comment here, get text from IDX sequences. Kind of redundant because that's the name of this, but that's okay. Now we're going to loop over the text, print this out. We're also going to print out the choice we made, as well as the actual label. So for I, comma t in enumerate text, and I think I might copy paste this one in because it's quite the line of code, and then I'll explain it. So what we've got here is we're doing a little string formatting. So we have 5 of these string formatting things, and we're going to, the first one's going to be a 30 of these little lines, and that'll basically create a little bar kind of separating multiple samples from each other so that you can kind of see it a little bit easier. And then we're going to have the T, so the text that we got from this, and then we're going to print out our choice, our actual label, and then another bar at the bottom. So that'll be able to print it out here so we can actually see it in a nice little format. So if we run this now, we'll be able to see the predictions that our model makes on a random sample of n samples. So let's do that. Okay, so I let that run, and because we didn't call the predict text function in our file, I'm just going to call it right here. So predict test, and as you can see, it spat out a bunch of text and the predictions it made. We definitely got some wrong, but that's the nature of how this works. And you can kind of see how some of these work. So again, the 1 is going to be anything that's positive, and then the 0s are going to be negative. So yeah, we got that working. So next we're going to try to attack the custom sentences. So we're going to say new function, and again, I'll give myself a little bit more room so you guys can see. And we're going to say def predict custom, and this is going to take a list of sentences that you're going to write yourself if you'd like to. And what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to process these sentences if they're not already tokenized. We're going to need to process them the same exact way that we did previously to our training and testing set. So to do that, within the helper library function, what we did is we removed the stop words and then we got the tokens. So we have to do the same exact thing we did to them. So first we're going to do stop equals, well actually I think we're going to have a few more imports. So let's go ahead and add those now. So those are going to be import string, import from nltk.corpus, import stop words, and then from nltk import word tokenize. Okay. And now we're going to be able to create this variable here, stop, which is going to be a list of words that we'd like to remove from our text. So stop equals stop words dot words, and we're going to say English because we're using English here. And then we're going to also add to that a list of punctuation. So string dot punctuation, if I can spell punctuation. Okay, that's right. And now we're going to create a variable called text clean, which is going to be the cleaned version of these sentences. And we're going to say for s in sentences. And again, I think I'm going to copy paste a line of code in here because this is quite a monster. But basically what this is going to do is it's going to join on another list here. And that list is going to basically just remove the punctuation and remove the stop words and lowercase everything. So that's all that does. Don't worry about it too much. You can look at it if you'd like to, but it's a little bit complicated. All right, so next thing we're going to have to do is we're going to have to go ahead and both turn the text now that we've tokenized to integers as well as padding the sequences. So we're going to create a similar variable that we set earlier, the test x sample, and that's going to be pad sequences. We're going to kind of wrap a couple functions in the same thing here, but pad sequences of the t.texts to sequences, text clean. We're going to pass it the text clean. and then sequence length. Okay, so let me explain what's happening there. So the T object is something that we got returned from our helper library earlier. So you can see it's right here. And what that is it's a Keras tokenizer. And within that, it has a function in it that can translate texts to sequences. And that's basically the same exact way we did it earlier. So we're going to want to reproduce that for outside sentences. Next, we're also going to pad the sequences to the same length that we padded our other sequences. So it'll be compatible with our model when we go to import it. Next, what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to create basically a dummy test Y sample because we don't have any labels for these, right? They're going to be custom sentences you've wrote, but you still have to pass this Y into your model in TensorFlow because it just needs it there because it's a placeholder. So we're going to just say to categorical, and we're just going to make a bunch of zeros. So numpy at zeros over the length of our testx sample. And 2. So let me explain this too. So we're creating a bunch of zeros. That's all that is. And because our labels are one hot, we're going to want to call to categorical and say that we have 2 classes. So actually, if we have a num classes variable up here, we probably should use that instead. Yeah, we'll go ahead and say that. So num classes. Beautiful. Okay, so now that we have our test X sample and our test Y sample, we're going to be able to go ahead and run our model again. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this line of code and just paste that bad boy in there. And again, we're grabbing our loss, prediction, correct prediction, and choice, and doing this test X sample and test Y sample as our feed dictionary. Okay, so I'm going to give us a little bit more room here. And then what we're going to do is we're going to need to print out stuff just like we did up here. So I'm actually just going to copy paste in this line again. The string formatting stuff's tough to type, so I'll just paste that in. So we're going to loop over our sentences this time instead of the text like we did before. We're going to loop over our sentences, print those out, the choice we made, and then again another little bar to separate stuff out. And then we should be able to set up a list of sentences that we would like to make predictions on that we're writing ourselves. So I'll write a couple of these. So these shoes make my feet hurt. They smell bad too. Don't buy. So I'm writing these kind of like in the format of a review because we trained our model on reviews. So we want to make sure that we stick with the same type of language that our model knows. So I'm going to have an example of both a positive and a negative sentence. This first one's obviously negative, the second one's positive. And then we're going to try to call that predict custom, passing it those sentences we just wrote. And I'm going to run that and see if it worked. Okay, so we let our model run and we can see the predictions that our model made on our custom sentences. And so we're all set. This code was just to give you an idea of how you might do this in TensorFlow. I urge you to try to figure out how you might clean this up. Due to the nature of how we wrote this over the course of many episodes, it did get a little bit messy. So I'll give you a hint. If you wrap this whole thing in a class, it'll be a little bit cleaner. I'm hoping to cover that in a future video. Other than that, play around with the hyperparameters, play around with the data that you're using, and let me know what you come up with. If you have any questions or you want to let me know what you did, leave that in the comment section down below, and I'll definitely check it out. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.